All right, so we've got this stack of notes here. It looks like a lot to unpack.
Yeah, it's a pretty deep dive this time.
Yeah, seems like we're going way back, trying to figure out where the Renaissance actually began.
Exactly. I think people hear Renaissance and they think Michelangelo, Leonardo, all those big names, but there's a lot more to it.
Right. It's like it's more than just the pretty paintings. Like, how did this whole thing even get started? What sparked this whole like explosion of art and science and everything?
And how did it change the world, right? Because, I mean, the Renaissance, it had a ripple effect. We're still feeling the effects of it today.
Yeah, that's what's so fascinating. It's not just some event in the past.
Mhm.
Like it shaped how we think, how we create, even how we explore the world. And based on these notes, we've got empires falling, Marco Polo jet setting across Asia, some powerful family in Florence, and something about like uh, a renewed interest in classical culture. It's
Yeah.
like, where do we even start?
Well, maybe a good place to start is, the fall of the Western Roman Empire. You have that in your notes there. 476 AD.
Right, 476. And then by 1066, Western Europe is like knee-deep in feudalism, right? Not exactly, a breeding ground for radical ideas and stuff.
Yeah, you're talking about a rigid social hierarchy, centuries of instability after Rome collapses, and yeah, it doesn't really seem like a recipe for a blossoming of art and culture.
Right, more like a recipe for, everyone just trying to survive, right?
But that's what's so incredible, right? It's that this incredible period of change arose from that context, you
So it's
know?
kind of like, a flower pushing up through the cracks in the pavement.
Yeah, exactly. Like something beautiful and unexpected coming out of this, seemingly rigid and kind of dark period.
I see what you're saying. And speaking of things that seem to come out of nowhere, Marco Polo, 1300 AD, back in Europe after like 20 years in China.
Yeah, can you imagine?
These stories he was telling about the Silk Road and Kublai Khan, like, paper money and gunpowder, it must just blown people's minds.
Absolutely. I mean, Europe was pretty isolated back then, right? And suddenly they're hearing about this whole other world, this advanced civilization. It must have been a huge shock to their worldview. And we have to remember that this is happening in the context of, increased trade thanks to the Crusades and the Mongol Empire expanding its reach. So there's already this flow of goods and ideas happening between East and West.
So it's like, it's not just Marco Polo rocking up with these crazy stories, right? There's this like whole undercurrent of change already happening.
Exactly. And it's all contributing to this sense that, things are shifting. The old order is being challenged.
So the stage is set. Europe's ready for a shakeup. And if these notes are anything to go by, it looks like Italy, specifically Florence, is where things really start to get interesting. I mean, you've got the Duomo being completed in 1436. It's just like
It's a statement, right?
this incredible feat of architecture. Like, was Italy just the place to be back then?
Well, it wasn't just that Italy was, trendy or whatever. What really set Italy apart was its political structure. Unlike the rest of Europe, with its, big, powerful kingdoms, Italy was divided into these independent city-states.
Right. So you've got all these little mini countries all competing with each other.
Exactly. It means more autonomy, more competition. They're all vying for power and prestige, which includes being patrons of the arts.
Ah, so this is where we get to the Medici family. You've got them highlighted here, especially Cosimo de' Medici. I mean, these guys were basically running Florence, right?
Well, they were incredibly powerful, and they, along with other wealthy families, really understood the power of art. It wasn't just about beauty, it was about communication, about influence. They commissioned these amazing cathedrals and sculptures and paintings to show off their wealth, sure, but also to shape public opinion, to legitimize their own power, and some would argue even to promote these humanist ideas that were starting to challenge the church's authority.
Wow, so it's like a whole game of chess being played out with masterpieces. And speaking of power shifts, you've got 1453 marked here. The Byzantine Empire, the last remnants of the Roman Empire, falls.
Right. Huge turning point.
And it's interesting because there's a note here about like a renewed interest in classical cultures happening around the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, is that a coincidence?
I don't think so. When Constantinople fell to the Ottomans, it was more than just a military defeat, right? It was like a whole cultural legacy disappearing. And so you have all these scholars and artists and intellectuals fleeing westward, bringing with them all this knowledge, all these ancient Greek and Roman texts that had been preserved in Byzantium. It must have been like rediscovering a lost civilization.
And this is all happening in Europe, which is already primed for, like, change, new ideas.
Exactly. And this influx of classical learning just fuels this fascination with ancient Greece and Rome. It's like a key ingredient in the whole Renaissance recipe, like this idea of human potential, the focus on reason and beauty and all of that.
So you've got these classical ideals mixing with new ideas from the East and this changing political landscape. It's like all these different forces are colliding and
The Renaissance.
And it's not just about art, right? I mean, looking at this timeline, we've got 17th century, Cervantes, Shakespeare, Galileo, Newton, Descartes. It's like,
It's everything, right? It's this explosion of knowledge in every field. The same spirit that gave you Michelangelo's David also gave you Galileo's astronomical discoveries.
so it's like this insatiable curiosity, this desire to understand the world, understand ourselves.
Exactly. It's about pushing boundaries, questioning the old ways of thinking. And that's what I think is so amazing about the Renaissance. It wasn't just about beautiful art or scientific breakthroughs. It was this whole shift in mindset, this new way of looking at the world.
So we've gone from the fall of empires to the rise of these powerful families, from Marco Polo's adventures to the rediscovery of ancient knowledge. It's like a domino effect, right? One thing leads to another, and it all culminates in this just incredible period of creativity and discovery, the Renaissance.
And that's the thing, right? It makes you think how much of our modern world, the way we think and create and understand things, how much of that is influenced by these events that happened centuries ago? Like we're still living in the weight of the Renaissance. And maybe that's something for our listeners to think about. What are those echoes? How do we see the legacy of the Renaissance in our own lives, in our own world?
It's definitely something to think about. It's like the Renaissance isn't just in the history books, it's all around us.
Yeah,
We're part of that story.
absolutely. And that's something I'm going to be thinking about for a while.
Yeah, me too.
All right, well, thanks for this deep dive. It's been really interesting.
My pleasure. Always great to, chat about this stuff.
For sure.